Board Hartford Subcommittee, which meets periodically to check in with the city of Hartford about how they're doing as a tier 2 municipality. Is that right? Alrighty then. We recording? Reminder to begin recording, it says. Please speak clearly into the microphone so that your comments will be recorded for the minutes. I am chairing this meeting today because I'm trying to be efficient. We're very concerned about efficiency at OPM, as Julian well knows. And so there was a statute or a public act passed last year, 25-174, which includes section 139, at which the chief executive officer of certain municipalities has to appear and discuss actions they're taking to mitigate their reliance on state funding. And so Hartford was one of those. So we thought we would both have this normal subcommittee meeting and let it suffice for that as well. So that's why I'm here today. Let's see. Mr. White is leaving the MARB. And I don't know if folks wanted to say anything to Mr. White or if he wanted to say anything to us, but I want to acknowledge your service. I have relied on your knowledge and experience and have been richer for it. And I just thank you for your time here with us.
Well, thank you. You know, someone once told me that when you volunteer for something, you often get back more than you put in. And that's certainly the case here. I've gotten so much, I've learned so much. When I was in college, and we're not going to get fussy about dates, I was an urban studies major because I really felt that that was an area of public service where there was a lot of good to be done. There was a lot of people with the greatest need, not a lot of resources, but manageable. Sort of. And so my career took me in another direction until I got the opportunity to do something here. And I've got to say that I'm probably in the minority when I think a politician has a very important role. And I think the legislature and those who put together the MARB Act got it right. Because I teach insolvency, I've looked back, I said, how do other states deal with troubled municipalities? And what they do is they create an emergency, they send a receiver in, throw out the existing elected officials, or at least curtail their power, muddle around until they get out of the financial crisis, and they leave. Here, again, at the last minute, they put this together, and where cities come in, and they get the benefit of wisdom of people like you, and folks at the state, and we fix the problem, or you get it, you improve the situation. Take a look at, West Haven. Someone's got to find, Tom Hamilton told me that there is a Saturday Evening Post article in the 1920s, the most corrupt city in America, West Haven. And, they came here twice and, we got them through. I mean, they were slowly improving. Whether that would end in our lifetime was a question. But thank you, Michael DeMassa, for showing the people of West Haven that maybe the course they were on wasn't the right one. So thank you, Michael. And then Mayor Borer came along and took advantage of that, and she made competence a political winner. And I have good feelings about West Haven, that something good has happened. We played a role, but a lot of other things happened. We let it happen. The folks the competence of the people that are here, again, bipartisan, there's Republicans, there's Democrats, there's labor management. And I've never heard, people go back and forth on those grounds. It was, what can we do to fix it? And that's really special. That's politics working. when we did deal with Hartford, where I lived in Greater Hartford for over 35 years, lived in Hartford in the last 5 years, and you know, it's a special place for me and my wife, and you know, to see young people come in to fix it. Luke Bronin had amazing ideas, surrounded himself with competent people. And really move forward, recognizing that there may be, and we may talk about it today, that there's some really structural things. I can't deal with it. You know, there's no, you know, unreality here. And of course, succeeded by Mayor Aralampalam, who is sort of special to me. He's a Quinnipiac grad and a former student. The student surpassed the teacher some time ago, and I'm quite proud of that. And you know, it's always good to, you know, the staff here has been terrific. You know, Kim has fielded my many suggestions with great aplomb. You know, a few like, what the hell are you thinking? But you know, and then it's you know, Julian and all the other folks that have helped have been just what resources for cities. And of course, you know, with Jeff, it's always good to see a lawyer doing well. And so I leave here with something I treasure. And when I see what you're doing, what the mayor's doing, I leave with hope. And I wish you the best going forward. So
Thanks,
good
Bob.
luck.
All right. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Is there any from the treasurer's office here? Okay, I was going to let them have some opening remarks, but if we don't have anyone online, with that, the subcommittee did have a regular meeting in May on May 1st, and a copy of the draft minutes was included for members in the subcommittee packet. Do members have any discussion of that? I wasn't there, so I will not be voting. I will abstain, but if there's not any questions or discussion, I'll accept a motion to accept the minutes.
So moved.
It's been moved.
Second.
Seconded. Any other discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? No. All right, the ayes have it. Minutes are approved. So on July 1st, the Hartford Board of Education confirmed Dr. Andre Townsell to be the superintendent of the Hartford Public Schools, and Dr. Townsell comes to Hartford from Calvert County Public Schools, which is a school district that he led in Prince Frederick, Maryland. Is that a county in Maryland, Prince Frederick? Oh, okay. I don't know Maryland that well. Dr. Townsell has been the superintendent of the Hartford schools since last month. I want to welcome you to Connecticut, and please introduce yourself to the subcommittee. And we'd like your thoughts and plans for the Hartford public school system.
Good morning, everybody. Dr. Andre Townsell, Superintendent of Hartford Public Schools. Just a very brief history, just so you know who I am. I'm born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. I'm a graduate of Detroit Public Schools. I was a student athlete in high school and earned a football scholarship to Howard University in Washington, D.C. In Washington, D.C., I earned my bachelor's, master's, doctoral degree, all from Howard University, and urban superintendent certification. I began my education career in the District of Columbia. I worked at every level in the education system, from student teacher to dean of student, football coach, basketball coach, boys and girls, athletic director, assistant principal at the high school level, specialist of student discipline and school climate, high school principal, assistant superintendent in Metro Detroit, superintendent of Benton Harbor, Michigan, superintendent of Calvert County Public Schools in Maryland, and now superintendent right here in Hartford Public Schools. I share all that to say I've seen every level, been in the trenches, and by the grace of God, had successful at every level. Most recently in Calvert County, when I got there, I believe there are only 24 school districts in Maryland, just as an FYI. It's a county system with the exception of Baltimore City schools. So all of our districts are very large. I believe when I got there, we were probably ranked middle of the pack, 12th, 11th in the state. As of last month, number 3 in the state. Every year we got higher. Prior to me taking this role, we were always number 4, but the data just came out. and now we're number 3. So we did what I shared that we would do. I said, I guarantee us to be top 3, if not 1 and 2 in the next 3 or 4 years, and we absolutely accomplished that. So I'm here in Hartford Public School to add value. When I realized that the community had an opening for a CEO and superintendent, I was super excited because my daughter was born at Hartford Hospital. You will not know, but I'll share. When I became a high school principal, I was trying to be in Hartford Public Schools. I tried to get into Bridgeport because I'm urban education. They needed a principal at Bassick High School. Did not get the job, but I did get the job in Southbridge Public Schools in Massachusetts. And if you know anything about Massachusetts education, they had 3 school systems in 2016 under something called receivership, which is like an emergency management. Holyoke Public Schools, Lawrence Public Schools, and Southbridge Public Schools. I became the turnaround principal for that high school and left them better than when I found it. So from there is where I became an assistant superintendent in my home state of Michigan and superintendent, and I've moved on that trajectory since. My prayer and my hope is to be a long-term superintendent right here in Hartford Public Schools, because I do believe that when turning around an organization, it's like a cruise ship and not a speedboat. I need time to turn it around. I can't just bend the curve. So that's the goal. That's the hope. I'm very blessed to work with a honorable mayor who understands and have love for the city. I have inherited an amazing team in Hartford Public Schools. As a matter of fact, I just left my senior leadership meeting to come here, and we're talking about how we're reorganizing to execute the future of Hartford Public Schools. So everything's on the table, from school consolidation to increasing enrollment. Everything's on the table to have a better tomorrow and to ensure that our next move is our best move. And with that, Secretary, I will park my bus.
Well, that's very impressive. Glad to hear all of that. I got to ask you, there's 24 school districts total in Maryland.
Absolutely.
How many do we have? 200 and something? Where's Kathy? 201. And we are, population-wise, got to be no more than half the size of Maryland population-wise. See, that's part of our problem, in my view.
Okay.
This is just me talking. I'm not speaking for the governor here.
New England democracy.
A New England democracy. Yeah, it's this home rule is hideously expensive. Okay,
Yeah,
you
our
heard it here
largest
first.
districts had 150,000 kids.
Wow.
So.
And it's much more efficient. Well, I'm not going to preach. Anyway, that's great. Any questions of the superintendent, the new superintendent? As you said that, I realized everybody over there has only been in your jobs about 2 years or less. So it's a fresh new team over there. So you don't have to answer for the past, but we do have high hopes for your future, and we're here to help, but we need to make a few changes, as I'm sure you know. So if anyone else doesn't have any questions or comments, we'll just move along to the next item, which is to review and discuss the 5-year plan for the Hartford Public Schools. Included in our agenda packet was a copy of the Board of Ed's 5-year budget forecast for 26 to 31. Superintendent Townsell and Ms. Richard, I believe, will be providing an overview of the BOE 5-year budget forecast.
Yes, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So I'm going to walk through the forecast. I believe you all have a copy. I'm also sharing it on the screen. And I'll move through some of the details quickly so we can really get to the heart of the topic. So starting off, we were asked to share this as a part of MARB, but also it's something we like to do just to get a sense of what our multi-year forecast is, so that we can make decisions in line with that. Of course, there are some limitations to this. We're making assumptions related to enrollment changes, related to revenue changes, related to student need that could change, but we're using the past 10 years of historical data to look forward to the future. We'll get into some of the slides that show the graphics, but high level, we are assuming a decline in enrollment in the multi-year forecast. This is based on the past decade. And all of the assumptions here, and this is a very similar methodology to what was shared last year for the 5-year plan, so that's keeping it pretty consistent. All of the methodology is looking at the past 3, 5, and 10 years, and then weighting that with the 3-year average being kind of having the most weight, as the most recent trends are likely to be the ones that continue. So overall, the key takeaway here is we are assuming there's a continued decline in enrollment, both related to just population base, but also in Hartford Public Schools specifically. We obviously have plans to want to change that, but that's just based on the historical trends thus far. And this is just the graph. It shows the historical data in blue, inclusive of this year, and then the green is the continued trend in that enrollment data. In terms of the revenue assumptions, it's assuming that our ECS will remain flat. We got the increase to the ECS grant with the full funding for FY26. We're assuming it's flat, continued from here. We're also doing for grants the same type of thing with the weighted averages of the 3, 5, and 10 years, which with the 3-year at most heavily weighted. And then also have some assumptions around private grants and billing, as that's an area we've been focusing on being able to increase, things like Medicaid billing. So briefly on the revenue assumptions, I think the main thing to point out here is largely flat revenue. We've seen a decline in the magnet operating grant that's largely related to decline in enrollment. That is essentially the ECS funding we get for suburban students who choose to come to Hartford. There also was a cut to the statewide magnet operating grant this year, so we're keeping our eyes on that as well. We see a slight increase to federal grants over time, so things like Title I, Title II, Title III, although I will say we are tracking that very closely with the current administration as we move into FY27. There were, you probably heard of some threats about this current year related to grants. Those are safe for now, but FY27 is something we're going to need to deeply consider around federal funding.
Let us know about that ASAP as soon as you know that there's a threat in 27, because we're going to be building our 27 budget this fall and presenting in February. So
yes, that's definitely a big area of concern. And that's kind of, we would treat that separately as a whole nother, I mean, it's about $25 million for us in federal funds. So that would be a big conversation we would need to have relative to what that is funding. Title I is the biggest portion of that, and then IDEA is the special education funding. And then just some assumptions around other state grants, a slight decrease over time just based on historical trends, some of that enrollment related, and then again, an increase to things related to Medicaid billing, et cetera. The main revenue picture, I will say the historical data does not include ESSER funds, just so as not to cloud the picture. That would have showed a big increase during the years 2021 to 2024. What you can see is overall flat revenue. You will notice there's an increase this year. That's just because previous budgets didn't include all grant funds in the budget. We're now including all funds when we do the budget process. And so largely the takeaway when you're looking at this, largely flat revenue with slight declines, specifically in the areas I mentioned, like the magnet operating grant. And again, that whole chunk that is federal grants, we're monitoring for the reasons I just named. This is just the numerical version of what I showed on the slide before, where you can see those trends in revenue. Again, ECS staying flat and some decreases in the magnet operating grant specifically. When we get to the expenditure side of the equation, kind of two big categories here. One would be our salaries and benefits. The other is our fixed expenses like tuition, transportation, and utilities. On the salaries and fringe benefits, that rate is also based on the past 3, 5, and 10 years. You will see that the increases are smaller than the typical annual contractual amounts. The reason for that is it's assuming a set of vacancies and a set of reductions are happening over time. And so a lot of the work that has happened over time is that as salaries have increased, certain roles have been decreased in order to keep that largely flat over time. And so that's part of the conversation as well. A lot of the reductions that have been made in staff because it's one of the only areas in our budget we have more autonomy over. On the tuition, transportation, and utilities, on the next slide, I'll show the specific weights of increase over time, but those are really the biggest parts of the budget that are largely fixed in a lot of ways and that have been increasing pretty significantly over time. Everything else we assume just modest inflation, and that's the smallest portion of the budget. So when we look at the rates, what I do want to focus on is tuition. We've seen over the past 10 years, with the 3 years weighted the highest, about a 6% increase in tuition every year. Again, that is the tuition we pay to other school districts and school operators when Hartford resident students choose to attend a different school or are outplaced for special education reasons. Transportation has been increasing at a rate about 4%. And that includes transportation for a lot of students who are also not attending Hartford Public Schools, and utilities has also been increasing. So those are the biggest drivers of the budget are in that fixed cost category. You can then see this is just a graphical representation of those rates of increase. You can see that that category for tuition is increasingly large in this year's budget. So FY26, 27% of our budget is tuition to other school districts, and that has been increasing at that rate of 6% over time, correct? So you can see essentially revenue largely flat with some declines based on enrollment, expenditures increasing. This is just the numerical version of the expenditures. You can see that tuition line is the one that is increasing at the fastest rate and largest dollar amount. When you put those two things together, you get the overall deficit forecast. You can see again, revenue slightly declining, expenditures increasing, which is leading to that multi-year outlook of increasing deficit. And this is assuming that, if nothing is done about it, it increases over time. And that this is a historical trend in Hartford as well. From what I understand, there have been $20 to $30 million deficits every year. I think ESSER was a period of time when there was more funding there that masked some of that, but this has been a structural issue. So now I want to talk a bit about kind of what the plans are related to it, open up the conversation. And I did add one slide I'm also going to share from what you have in your packet that helps tell some of the story. So in terms of strategies, I'm just going to talk broadly from what's on this slide. There's things within our locus of control, and the new superintendent, we're really excited to have Dr. Townsell, has already started talking about some of these things. There has been conversation around potential consolidation of schools. I will say, having done some of that work across the country, consolidating schools in my previous district, I did some of that work. It saves maybe about $1 million per school that is consolidated, especially if you still have all the students. It creates some efficiencies in the building, some efficiencies in staff, but it's not a silver bullet in terms of our fiscal reality. So I want to be honest about that. We've also been talking with the city about consolidated services across the city and BOE to generate efficiencies. Julie and I have had some initial conversations about that. But again, that takes some time, and it's not necessarily going to yield the savings that are going to solve the structural nature. The other piece is enrollment, and Dr. Townsell has talked about this a lot, of wanting to get students back into Hartford. I think one concrete way in which we're focused on that is around special education. And so, as you may know, one of the challenges is when students are outplaced, or actually more often when they leave, they go to another district and then get outplaced. It leads to pretty high costs, and we would prefer to keep those students in our district, home in Hartford, educate them there. We are excited this year. Our special education teacher vacancy rate has gone down significantly. So we were at overall for vacancies a 13% rate last year. We're at 4% now for certified teachers. Special education specifically, it was 25% last year. It's now down to 9%. So that is exciting because the first step is being able to staff those classrooms to be able to retain students. So there's the piece around that's we need to explore various consolidation. We need to be able to offer programs to students. But I'll say the other, so that's kind of things in our locus of control. And I'll say, I got here 8 months ago. I've been trying to figure this out. I've looked at budgets of school districts across the country. I was managing a $700 million budget for 33,000 students in Oklahoma. We dealt with the deficit, but it didn't look like this. It was something that we solved. We had to do some right sizing, and then we were good to go. And I think what part of the challenge is just the funding apparatus associated with the school choice system is creating a lot of this dynamic. And I'm going to show the next slide. It's not in your packet. This is something I worked on so that I could add some context to the conversation. But what I'm showing you here is, this is just for Hartford resident students who attend non-Hartford public schools. So these are the students that choose to leave. They go to a magnet school. They go to an open choice school. Some of those are outplaced students. What you see on the top is revenue. So what we're counting is the ECS funding we get for those students, because Hartford gets ECS funding for all resident students, and then we're paying tuition when a student goes to a different district. So the ECS funding, that's inclusive of the state and the city portion for those students. Some of them are counted in different ways, whether they're magnet or open choice. I also added in the state excess cost funding there. The excess cost is for students who are costing a lot in terms of special education services. They have to be more than 4.5 times the average of district cost. We don't have any students in HPS who cost that much, so I've included it here as a form of revenue supporting students who are leaving the district. They're often outplaced students. And just for context, that means a student is costing more than $90,000 a year to educate. So those are the forms of revenue that we receive for Hartford resident students who are choosing to leave our school district. Then you see the expenses. Tuition here is exactly what I showed on the other slide. That's tuition we pay to other school districts when students leave. And then transportation, we cover transportation for a subset of those students, particularly special education students. And this year, that was actually our transportation expenses were about $5 million. Half of that was students who were leaving the district. And so what this is attempting to paint a picture of is revenue we get for Hartford resident students who leave Hartford schools next to expenses for those same students. And what you can see is that gap is largely the same as the deficit we're predicting into the future, and is one of the biggest drivers of our problem. And actually in FY26, that's the current year, you see there's about a $30 million difference in revenue and expense. That's about what we cut from our budget this year. And so there's been work to cut from Hartford's budget to be able to sustain this cost structure. And my guess is mathematically, and I could pull the data, at one time these were more aligned, right, in the past, because expenses were like, they've been increasing every year. There was probably a time when it was more aligned. That gap started to grow. I think ESSER probably masked some of that. And we're getting to the point now where in FY25, FY26, the gap is continuing to increase. So this I wanted to bring up because there is work that we need to do for Hartford Public Schools to make it a desirable location. It's hard because the structure of how the choice system is funded means we have to cut from those services every year. And one last piece I'll add, in the past 4 years, it's actually not driven by more students leaving. We've actually had a decrease in certain areas of students leaving. The per pupil costs of tuition are what are driving that tuition increase. So I will park my bus there and just open it up for conversation.
I think Lisa's got a question.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I have a question. I know that you went over how you estimated the transportation expenses for students exercising choice. Can you explain that again for me?
Yeah, and so it works. I'm actually going to stop sharing. I'm just going to pull up a slide because there's different rules around it depending on the type of student. But essentially what is driving that is that we cover door-to-door transportation. So that's when a student's picked up from home, goes to school, not only for students who attend Hartford Public Schools, but also if they choose to go out of the district. And so I'm pulling up, yeah, so when a Hartford resident student attends a magnet school, so like CREC essentially, or open choice, that is CREC, the state pays for that. But if they are receiving door-to-door, then Hartford Public Schools pays for it. And so out of our whole transportation budget, 75% of that $35 million is door-to-door transportation. And so that amount for students leaving is largely door-to-door.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. White.
Thank you very much for that concise presentation. I think we have heard some of the things that you've talked about, and I really think we need to focus on the two things you highlighted at the end, chef, school choice, and education. Aren't those state mandates that you have to pay for that, and that, for example, we've heard of these little meetings where the recipients of the service decide what's best without regard to cost. And that just seems to me to be broken. Mm-hmm. For example, I don't know enough about special ed, and I obviously care about that, but I'm wondering if on the state level, I mean, you've made you posed the question, Mr. Secretary, of, what can the city do to lower its dependence on the state? I think the flip question is, what can the state do to lower the burden on the city? That's, for example, why can't the special ed system be income based? In other words, there are some people, probably not in Hartford, but there are some people that take advantage of those services. They should have those services, but they have an ability to pay something. And maybe that would alleviate something on the state so that they could provide something. Same with chef. I think the focus really should be, given that we have the state here, what changes in the law can we do? I don't see a way out of that. I mean, when you look at those numbers there, and you said, if you close the school, it's $1 million. I think this is, as the mayor and his predecessor said, there's a structural issue here, and we got to deal with it. Otherwise, we're just gonna, you just extend your chart, and the number gets bigger, and I don't know what to do. But Jeff does. So, yeah.
I don't know what to do, but I'm happy to start thinking about what we might do. And I'm glad you're all here. You're all fresh, as I said, in these positions and fresh thinking, and I appreciate that. I would love to have my staff reach out to your staff and talk about this particular issue, both on special ed and on choice. You make some excellent points, but I think that might not have been the entire story based on what I remember about that issue. State mandate, you say. Our municipalities are subdivisions of the state. we're in this together. We're partners. It's not us coming at them. It's all of us doing what we have to do to educate children and do right by our kids. So it's not an us versus them. It's we've got a division of labor. We've got a set of taxes that we can deploy on that. They've got a set of taxes they can deploy on that. They've got control at the local level. We don't have that. So we need to work as partners on how we do this. On special ed, the governor had an initiative this year. We put some more resources out for special ed. I know SDE is working on some standards for the providers of special ed and whether or not the what's needed and what are they charging. And I think rates are going to be part of what SDE comes up with. So we're working the special ed issue. Definitely an issue. Choice is a much bigger problem for us. We obviously lived with a court order for many years. We recently got out from under that. We agreed with the plaintiffs to stop having the court look over our shoulder every day about how we do that. That is an ongoing issue for us, the choice issue. I'd love to work with whatever innovative ways we can come up with to make that easier for all of us to comply with. I'm happy to explore that. And I'm going to have staff reach out to you on that issue. Great points. I do, though, want to go back to your first bullet on that last page. We think you need to lean into that. We think that's I'm glad you listed that first. I think that's where you need to lean into. We do need to right size. We need to make sure that the market that we're in, we're meeting the demands, but we're doing so in the most cost effective way. And that's I think going to produce some benefits, some dividends for us sooner rather than later. These bigger issues like choice is going to be kind of nettlesome. It's got a lot of politics freighted with the choice thing, but right sizing is like your everyday budgeting, your everyday, blocking and tackling, to put it in a sports metaphor. That's what we need to do from my perspective. The other things, happy to talk about all of that. We've also done the tuition reform. We've made that a little more generous for the town lately, admittedly over my objection, but we have made that a little more generous to the town. So you're welcome. Anyway, that's all I'll say about that issue. Any other questions or concerns or comments? Ms. Kennison.
I do. Thank you. And Caitlin, Superintendent, for taking a look at this. I just want to bring one thing back to the attention, and this is a new administration versus the prior, and the fresh eyes is really definitely welcoming to us. One thing that I want to bring to your attention is one of our board members who is not with us today, Mr. Hamilton, he did at a subcommittee meeting, brought to the attention of the Hartford Public Schools the model that he put into play in Norwalk, which deals with special education. And the model was built on the first year of building a program to get special ed to come back into town. And it could not satisfy all of those students, but it would take into consideration the needs that you could handle. And it was like a tiered structure where those that have severe needs, we know that they have to be outsourced. The city would, at that time, was not able to satisfy those particular needs and specialties. But there is a group where families would be very open to having their children stay in the public school systems versus going elsewhere. And we haven't heard any kind of work being done in that area. However, you did shed light today for me, as someone who watches the numbers. I was not aware that you had a 25% vacancy in that area, and that would have been the reason why you couldn't take that on. Okay, so I appreciate you putting the spotlight on that and also why that occurred, and glad to hear that you're only at 9% right now. So I think that if your administration is open to it, I could, if you'd like, ask Mr. Hamilton to come back and tell you about that program. And it didn't pan out over 7 years is what happened until he actually could reap the rewards and get some money back into the city to take on programs within. So I don't know if that's something that you've already looked at, but it is something to consider. So thank you.
And we're definitely open to any good idea. So would love to do that. And want to echo, we also are partners in this. And so I think there's a dual part of things that we need to do related to right sizing, like the superintendent shared, getting clear in our direction, and then partnering we want to do with the state to figure out a longer term solution. I will say in terms of right sizing, one concrete example of how just visioning this could look different is if revenue actually were passed through to the district where the student attended, then they were making decisions related to the cost of education of that student. I think that might create a different financial incentive structure that would actually lower costs. And so I actually don't think the only avenue is just give us more revenue. And in this scenario, I would rather not have any of this revenue and have that passed on to other districts to make smart decisions about educating those kids. So I'm looking forward to talking more about that.
Anything else on that topic? Next item on our agenda then is the city and the Board of Ed's 5-year plans. Included in your agenda package was a copy of the city's 5-year plan that the MARB approved earlier this year. And I understand the mayor and our friend Julian will be providing an update of the 5-year plan.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you all for being here. Before I start, I hope you'll indulge me in a moment of personal privilege. To Professor White, you will certainly be missed in this state. Professor White taught me bankruptcy in law school, and thankfully I haven't had to use any of that in this role. But it has been a real friend of the city's and a friend of mine personally, and Connecticut's lost us. Hopefully your grandkids gain. We'll miss you. And also, while we bid farewell to one friend, just want to welcome Dr. Townsell, as I have in many arenas, but I hope you see, I've seen a little bit today and will continue to see why we are so excited about Dr. Townsell and the potential he brings to our district. Tremendous experience and tremendous stories of what he's done in other school districts, but also having seen firsthand how teachers and paraeducators and administrators respond to him. I think it is a very exciting thing for the city of Hartford. At times I've heard members of this body express to me privately, and I've expressed maybe a lack of collaboration, cooperation, and transparency between the Hartford Public Schools and the city and Hartford Public Schools and members of the MARB. I really think this is a new era, and I hope that in all arenas, in the relationship with the state and certainly in the relationship with the city, that's it's treated as a new era, and we're really excited for it. I won't go through every part of the 5-year plan, although I'm happy to take questions on any individual piece of it. We obviously presented and passed it not long ago, but I want to focus on specifically, we were called here to discuss the use of the supplemental grant and what we intend to do with it, and then just kind of give you some updates on some of the mitigation that we have talked about in the past and has evolved since that point. The supplemental grant itself, we plan to use primarily for roads-related capital expenditures. We had a conversation as we were discussing the 5-year plan and our past fiscal year budget about the city starting to take a look at going out to bonding for the first time in about a decade. And, there's a lot of, in the course of that decade, there's been a lot of deferred infrastructure investments that the city is really feeling the impacts of. 27 of our 29 trash trucks are past their useful life. I've talked to police officers driving cars that are so rotted out at the bottom, you can see the road underneath it. I think all of our residents have seen the impact of a lack of investments on our streets. And Secretary Beckham, I hope the recent improvements on Capitol Ave have been helpful, although there's more work to be done there. Yeah. Look, there's work to be done to the basic infrastructure of the city, and the longer you wait, the more expensive it gets. And we hope to address that. And this hopefully changes both the timeline and the scope of how we can do that, and might also impact, for the sake of fiscal prudence, a timeline of when exactly we look to engage in some sort of a bond offering. Obviously, something we intend to speak closely to both OPM and the Treasurer's Office about as we contemplate that. In terms of budget mitigation, in many ways, one of the points of greatest financial concern to us has been the financial concern of the Board of Ed, and I think the intricacies of that were laid out very well. Dr. Townsell said something about looking at every option, and as we think about the partnership, Secretary Beckham, that you talked about between the state, the city, and the board, each of which I think has a role in this and needs to have some skin in the game. I think that we view it from that perspective. And from the school side, right sizing is certainly something that we have begun to talk about in depth. When we were interviewing Dr. Townsell, I said, Culver County has about 16,000 students, just like the city of Hartford. And I asked him how many high schools they had, and I think he said 6, right? And we've got 11 in the city of Hartford. We've got 39 schools. And while the savings from consolidation of a single school may not immediately be felt in terms of the dollars that are spent within that building, and staff will hopefully transfer to fill vacancies in other buildings, I think the impact within those schools will be very deeply felt. Many of our schools, and the vast majority of them, maybe all of them, are missing some key components in terms of specialists within those schools for math and science and reading and social workers and administrators and coaches. We don't have a single high school, or maybe there's one high school that can field a football team by itself. And not that a football team is the only thing you need in a high school, but I think allegorically shows the level of what our students are missing within each of those schools. And as part of bringing those kids back, which I think is a flip side of that coin that that was spoken to, we've got to be able to tell families within our district that when you send your kids to school, they have everything that's within that building to meet their needs. And I think in terms of being able to identify and address certain social and academic problems that might lead to IEPs down the road, and getting out ahead of some of the special ed costs that rise precipitously if they're not addressed early. I think in terms of keeping kids in our district, whether we're keeping them there because that classroom is meeting their needs, whether we're keeping them there because they have sports or arts or music that you need to round out a school experience. I think those are all important components. I also, I don't know that we've talked about this within the context of the MARB before, but we made a big announcement this year with the Hartford Foundation and Hartford Promise that all City of Hartford students who get a 3.0 GPA and 93% attendance will get $100,000 for college. And I have anecdotally, I don't know if applause lines are allowed here, but I think that deserves an applause line. Anecdotally, spoken to a lot of families who I think otherwise might have pulled their kids out starting in middle school or in high school, who are now reconsidering those decisions. And so I think we're at a moment in which there's some opportunity to really change the way in which folks view Hartford Public Schools, and I think impacting the structure of our schools is an essential component of that. Our conversations around consolidation of back-end functions is another component of that. And I think it's something that the superintendent and I both want to do very thoughtfully and ensure that we are not jumping into haphazardly. But it's something that we are really considering. About a year ago, we took on school crossing guard functions at the city. And that was less of a consolidation than something to try to help from a budgetary standpoint. We have IT functions already consolidated at the city with MHIS. And so, it's something that we will try to explore as we move down the road. That's in the ledger of the skin in the game from the school standpoint. I think the city's got to have skin in the game. We right now our MBR is about 96 million a year from the city side. We put 4.5 million of our surplus into the Board of Ed budget, so it's a little over 100 million that the city's spending on Board of Ed. It was one-time dollars this time, so that we had the flexibility to potentially look at that funding to use towards future consolidation of back office functions. But we're taking a look at how we can continue to expand our contributions to the schools, and we know that is something that is overdue and something we take seriously. And then, third side of that, and I think all three need to happen simultaneously, is the involvement of the state in that, and whether that is exploring the foundation and inflation adjustment of the foundation to address the rising costs that every school district is facing, and Hartford has shown, shows that directly leads to a deficit, growing deficit year over year. Whether that's continuing to explore tuition restructuring or caps, and Secretary Beckham, we certainly appreciate that impact that has had on our budget in the last couple of years. Whether that's continuing to look at how we're funding education as it meets the needs of students, whether that's special ed students, whether that's English language learners, whether that's high poverty districts, and how the ECS formula relates to that. I think it's something that we would love to work collaboratively with the governor's office and the legislature over the coming several years, and maybe instead of looking at it as a year-to-year thing, over more of a 5-year horizon, to meet the needs of districts like Hartford, but certainly to meet the needs of Hartford, which is, if we do nothing, going to continue to have deficits that are frankly too large for a city to fill, or a board to figure out on its own. And so, we view that as a partnership, and I think in a partnership, each of the 3 partners needs to come to the table with solutions, and we appreciate the partnership in doing that. We're looking at shared services beyond education with the town of East Hartford, and we hope that task force that we created last year will come up with its first set of recommendations. We have a fellow from Harvard who has been working with us over the summer and into the fall to consolidate some of that, and we think there will be probably 3 phases of recommendations. To the first, more of a pilot basis and smaller. The second involving probably some sharing of positions, and the third contemplating potential sharing of departments. And it is an attempt at regionalism that at least this Harvard fellow thinks is probably among the most ambitious that has happened in New England or the Northeast, and we're really excited about it. And then, 2 more points I'll touch on quickly. The reduction in the pension liability. It's about 8.8% of our budget, I believe, is our MRF contribution. Julian will correct all my inaccuracies in a second, I'm sure. But we have impaneled the COLA task force together with some retirees. But the uniqueness of this task force is that we are not only looking at the potential of a COLA in the pension, but looking at some of the structural thoughts we have on the sustainability of the pension and reducing the liabilities within our pension. And we've reached out to formerly Hooker Holcomb, I think it's USI, to help us put together some scenarios and to try to present that to our city treasurer. And then finally, economic development, which we've talked about in great detail here. The sustainability and the growth of our grand list is essential to the future financial health of the city. The biggest threat to that, obviously, is these large downtown office buildings that we have, which sit, in reality, probably over 40%, probably around 43% vacant. And Hartford, as well, has more commercial office space than Bridgeport, New Haven, and Waterbury combined. And that creates a real threat to our grand list. It's something that we are working through now, and I think have budgeted conservatively around for the coming years. But it's something that we're also working on collaboratively with the state. DCD, CRDA, and the City of Hartford are working together in a task force to study the real office vacancy, to come up with estimates around the cost of, again, right-sizing our office space in this case, of converting a minimal amount of buildings to residential, the minimum needed to push the existing commercial spaces into a fewer number of buildings so that those buildings can be sustainable and won't be underwater, but will allow for residential conversion. It has a dual benefit. One, it saves a number of these commercial buildings from going under, which would have a huge impact on our grand list. But 2, residential buildings are valued much more highly than commercial buildings. And so we've found that in these conversions, even after tax deals, we're often getting far more in tax revenue from residential buildings in our downtown than we are from commercial buildings. They're filling up immediately. They all have wait lists the minute I cut a ribbon. 46% of those residents are coming from New York or Boston seeking lower cost of living. There's tremendous opportunity for growth within our residential market in our downtown, and that's a silver lining behind the gut punch of COVID is I think a real opportunity for not just stabilization but growth in our grand list through some of these conversions. And I will say again, in partnership, the state is right there at the table with us. DCD and CRDA, along with a couple of my senior staff members, are working together on the study, and we hope to be able to release that in the coming weeks.
That's great. That's good. Good news on all those fronts. Got new leadership at CRDA, as I understand it, someone you know, so hopefully that'll work out well for the city as well. Julian, did you want to do any more heavy detail on the 5-year plan? The one thing I was going to note that you didn't note was you do have an internal service fund deficit around workers' comp and the medical claims. And what's going on with that?
So the deficit reflected in the internal service funds is typically a reflection of the incurred but not reported. I don't know. So those resolve themselves over time as we get the claims and pay them down.
Okay.
Secretary?
Yes, ma'am.
One question, we have found sometimes that if you're seeing a trend that those dollars of the negative fund balance within those internal service funds, that it is necessary to actually increase your budget to then to reduce that deficit so that you can bring that down, because it could be an outlay that you did not budget properly, which is then pushing a deficit to a different fund.
Right. And I think over time, and I don't recall specifically for FY26, but I think over time you would see that the budgetary contributions to those funds has ratcheted up.
Yes, I'm really pleased about the conversation, and especially pleased to hear the emphasis on partnership and everybody sharing. One thing that I'm starting to hear, and I'm hoping there's more of it, is I really appreciate, and I think everyone will benefit by the experience of people nationally. I mean, Ms. Richard, you've looked at a lot, superintendent, and you're hiring some consultants, and I just wondering what resources the state has about what other states are doing about special ed. I mean, I think Chef is maybe sui generis, but about some of these issues, because there seems to be a lot of innovation going on, and that seems to be a thing. Your congratulations on community policing. It's good to see some good news about that kind of stuff, and no troops here. So I'm just wondering about that, because as I said, and I really mean it, that I think the format of this body and the state is really special. And I think a lot has been done, more can be done. And I just don't know what the resources are, but I think if, to the extent some could be brought to bear, like certainly Tom Hamilton's thing, that can give you something to look at. I think the second note is, I think everyone's recognized that a couple of the items on the agenda are long-term. Well, long-term can mean, well, I don't have to think about it right now, or let's kind of do that. But with your chart, you have put costs on that. So there is a cost of waiting on the big ideas. Certainly I know the state's interested in seeing some, restructuring, and you seem, amenable to that kind of stuff. And, but I do think that you've got to put some timelines in there, because there is a cost, and you can do that. But again, this is a better discussion than 8 years ago. So,
thank you. Other questions or comments? I think we're having the discussion under item 6 right now about the mitigation plan. You've laid that out. I'll just again obviously you highlighted your Board of Ed projected deficit, and we discussed that and what we might do about that. And I gave you my thoughts, and I'm gonna follow up with our staff, talking to your staff about what we can do on both special ed and the choice costs you've got. And any other thoughts we might have about right sizing, we could pass those along as well. Do note some good news. You do project your fund balance to grow over the 5-year plan from 10.7 to 12.7. So that's good news. You've had some bond rating upgrades in the last couple of years. Still not in a great spot, but better than you were. And we've had no new weaknesses or deficiencies in the financial reporting, it looks like, in the last 3 years. So good news, some recent good news for the city. Talked about the projected deficit. We talked about the pension. I'm glad you mentioned the pension. You do have somewhat higher than statewide average on that issue in terms of your liability. Going to work on that internal service fund deficit as well. And we'll talk about capital projects when you're ready. And it looks like you're going to use your supplemental grants for that to do some road stuff. So that's good. But we got big challenges clearly coming down the pike. I'm not sure I have any other comments. If staff or anyone else on the board has any other questions or any other thing you want to do, we're going to follow up, obviously. I don't have closing remarks either, unless someone else does. I think I'm going to give everyone back the rest of their morning, unless someone has something else they want to talk about. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Motion carries. We'll see you soon.